All right, welcome back to another episode of Always Adaptive. My name is Randall James. I'm a strength and a running coach with 11 years of experience. And today we are seeking to answer the question, should runners lift with heavy load and lower reps or lighter load and higher reps? This is an age-old question, and you will often hear very conflicting answers. It's long been said that runners should lift lighter weights for more reps to build endurance. I even heard this in my RRCA coaching class. RRCA stands for Road Runners Club of America. They didn't spend much time on it because it was a running cert after all, not a lifting cert, but they basically just threw out there that runners should be doing higher rep protocols. Anyways, I felt qualified to answer this question as I am a strength coach who also coaches runners. This is actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart and is one of my passion projects, teaching runners how to strength train effectively to ensure that they don't, one, lose their muscle mass as they're training for whatever, races or longevity, two, reduce their injury risk, and ultimately, three, improve their running. But before we get into the debate, real quick, if you like health and fitness information coming from someone who actually reads the studies and can bob and weave between two different worlds, both lifting and running, then hit that subscribe button. I release a new video every single week, and this channel is basically just my way of getting the things I think about out of my head and into a creative outlet of sorts. Also, if you're over on audio, a 5-star review is greatly appreciated. And lastly, I have an electrician installing a Tesla charger in my house right now, so if at any point you hear banging or drilling, my apologies beforehand, I gotta make it work. Now, with all of that out of the way, grab a coffee and let me learn you. So first, I think it's important to define what we mean by lifting heavy versus lifting light. Traditionally, they would look like this. Heavy traditionally means 3 to 8 reps with a heavy load, while light traditionally refers to 10 to 30 reps with a lower load. There's, of course, some overlap from 6 to 10, where other people may consider 8 to be light, but it's not a big deal for this discussion. When you lift heavy in that 3 to 8 rep range, your body relies mostly on the phosphocreatine system. That's your short and explosive energy pathway. Now compare that to lifting lighter weights for higher reps. When you're in that 10 to 30 rep range, you shift towards glycolysis and even some oxidative metabolism. You'll start with slow twitch fibers, but as fatigue builds, the fast twitch fibers get recruited too. Instead of tension being the main signal, it's more about metabolic stress. The burn, the lactate, the buildup of byproducts in the muscle, that can still drive growth, but it's a very different pathway. Tension is still a signal, it just takes longer to get there. Think of it like gears in a car. If you start a set with the intention of getting, let's say, 20 reps, the beginning of the set will not be hard enough to recruit all those large motor units. That's your first gear. What is a motor unit, you might ask? A motor unit is basically a power line from your brain to a bundle of muscle fibers. Think of it like a light switch. Flip the switch and all the muscle fibers in that group turn on. Some switches control a few little muscle fibers, those are your small motor units, and others control a larger group of big, strong muscle fibers, those are your large motor units. Now, as the set continues, the weights feel heavier and the demand becomes greater. Now those medium motor units get involved. Boom, second gear. As you approach the end of the set, reps 14 through 20, let's say, these are really starting to become grinders. The speed of the reps is slowing down, and the demand is now so great that all motor units, small, medium, and large, are all being recruited because without them, you will fail the rep. That's your last or your third gear. Now, it's said that heavier load, lower rep stuff gets you to third gear faster. Basically, instantaneously, you're recruiting all of the motor units. I've basically just described Henneman's size principle, which is the idea that we recruit motor units from smallest to largest based on the force demand of the task. I know some of you have heard me describe this before, but some of these concepts will need repeating as newer folks discover my content. Okay, so now that we have the terms defined, what's my take? This is going to make the science-based lifters very happy, but I think heavyweight, low-rep training is superior for runners to lower-weight, high-rep training, and there are a couple reasons why. First and foremost, damage buildup. Runners already accrue an incredible amount of damage during race prep, especially towards the tail end of their program. Most marathon training programs will have long runs cap at 18 to 20 miles, and most half marathon training programs will cap at 12 to 15. During these periods, your legs are messed up. Part of the training is teaching yourself to be comfortable running on fatigued and damaged legs. We also know that higher rep, low weight training is going to produce more damaged and localized fatigue than higher load training. With this in mind, we should keep weight training volume to its most manageable point while still triggering muscle protein synthesis. This just makes good sense to me. Second, proponents of high rep, low load training would say that low load training improves endurance in the muscles. Granted, but I would argue that if you need to improve your endurance using resistance training, then your running program is hot garbage. Your running program should net you all of the endurance necessary to improve towards your goal. Weight training is for three purposes: to ensure that you don't lose your muscle while running hard, and potentially even building some if you're eating enough, reducing injury risk by improving the durability of the body via the bones and connective tissues, and lastly, increasing strength and power. I mentioned the science-based lifters because their argument is that if you can get the same hypertrophy results without the localized fatigue and damage that comes with high rep stuff, why wouldn't you? I totally get this argument, but I also understand the high volume folks when they say at a certain point the weights get extremely heavy and it becomes a risk to constantly push that hard. Like if someone has a 600-pound squat, let's say, training close to that too frequently is begging for trouble. Anyways, I think there are specific contexts where the low rep stuff is very good for runners, but also for anyone else that has a sport as a hobby. Being able to attenuate volume so that your hobby is not impacted is pretty dang important, I'd say. Now, I just made some bold claims. What's my proof that you can get the same benefits from heavier load and lower reps as you can with the higher rep stuff? I have 3 studies to go over briefly. These are well-known studies in the hypertrophy and science-based lifting spaces. First one is titled The Effect of Repetition Ranges on Maximal Strength and Hypertrophy. They split 14 athletes into 2 groups. One group trained heavy, 3 to 5 reps at 90 to 95% of their max. The other trained lighter, 10 to 12 reps at about 60 to 70%. Both groups trained for 8 weeks. Now let's look at the numbers. On the flat bench press, the heavy group went from about 62 kilos at baseline to almost 79 kilos after 8 weeks. The high rep group only went from 60 to 67 kilos in that same time. That's a massive strength difference, double the gain in the heavy low rep group. The squat told the same story. The heavy group climbed from 85 kilos up to 108 kilos, while the high rep group only moved from 84 up to 95. Again, heavy low reps delivered much bigger gains. Now let's talk about muscle growth. They measured quadricep thickness with ultrasound. At baseline, both groups were right around 55 millimeters. After 8 weeks, the high rep group increased from 54.8 millimeters to 58.1 millimeters. The low rep group went from 55 millimeters to 57.9. So both groups gained about 3 millimeters of size, which works out to roughly a 5 to 6% increase. In other words, whether you lift heavy for low reps or lighter for higher reps, your quads grew the same. So the takeaway from this study, at least, is that if you want muscle, it doesn't matter whether you do 5 reps or 12 reps. Your quads will grow either way. But if you want to actually get strong, heavy training didn't just win, it blew lightweights out of the water. We're talking 126% greater gains in the bench and 114% greater gains in the squat. Nutso. The next study is titled Effects of High Volume versus High Load Resistance Training on Skeletal Muscle Growth and Molecular Adaptations. This was a very clever study that tells us something pretty important about heavy versus high volume training. Here's how the study was set up. The researchers brought in 15 trained guys, average age about 23, with around 7 years of lifting experience. These weren't newbies, which is important because new lifters experience newbie gains. Basically, they look at a weight and get stronger or build muscle, which can add a lot of variability to the results. Now, the program ran for 6 weeks and they trained for 3 days a week. Now, here's the clever part. Each athlete trained one leg with high volume and the other leg with high load. That way, the researchers eliminated genetics, diet, and recovery differences. The only variable was how that leg was trained. That way, they serve as their own control. The high volume leg started with sets of 10 reps at about 60% of 1 rep max, and volume went up week by week. The high load leg worked in sets of 5 reps at roughly 80% of 1 rep max, with intensity climbing each week as well. Upper body work was kept standard across the board, 3 sets of 10 at 70% of max. Now for the results. Right after the training protocol, at what they called the post time point, the high volume leg looked like it won. It grew about 3.2% bigger in cross-sectional area compared to basically no growth in the heavy leg. That sounds like a big difference, right? But when they checked again after a proper 10-day recovery window, what they called post-PR, the story completely flipped. Both legs showed an identical plus 0.7 centimeter square increase in size. So all that early advantage in the high volume leg disappeared. The simplest explanation is that some of that early gain was just transient swelling, and once things settled down, both legs ended up with the same actual hypertrophy. And this is an important point. Just because you experience a pump doesn't mean that your muscle is actually growing. I don't even really chase a pump anymore, to be honest with you. It's a nice feeling when it comes, but it's not required in my opinion. Anyways, once again, strength told a different story. The heavy trained leg was stronger at both checkpoints. Right after training, it put up about a 30 kilogram increase versus 25 kilograms in the high volume leg. 10 days later, the gap even widened. Heavy was up 34 kilos, high volume was only up 29. That's about a 15 to 20% greater strength gain just from lifting heavier. And here's the molecular angle from the study. Firstly, they measured two different forms of protein synthesis. Myofibrillar protein synthesis, that's building the actual contractile machinery, the fibers that produce the force, actin, myosin, titin, and so on. Think of these as the hardware of the muscle. And non-myofibrillar protein synthesis. This includes sarcoplasmic proteins and metabolic machinery. Enzymes, glycogen-handling proteins, mitochondria, and other cellular support systems. In this study, heavy and high volume training were equal when it came to myofibrillar synthesis, but high volume training drove up myofibrillar synthesis more, suggesting it was boosting the support system of the muscle without directly adding more contractile hardware. And that lines up with the cross-sectional area results that we talked about earlier. The early size bump in the high volume leg may have included some transient swelling, like I said, or fluid shifts. After a full recovery period, that advantage disappeared and both legs ended up with the same actual hypertrophy. So basically, high volume makes you look bigger in the short term, but once recovery clears the smoke, the heavy work is what leaves you stronger and builds just as much muscle. Now, the last study we need to get into is from Brad Schoenfeld and colleagues in 2015, titled Effects of Low versus High Load Resistance Training on Muscle Strength and Hypertrophy in Well-Trained Men. 18 guys with lifting experience were matched for baseline strength and then split into two groups. One group trained heavy, doing 8 to 12 reps per set, while the other group trained light, doing 25 to 35 reps per set. Both groups did 3 sets of 7 different exercises, 3 times per week for 8 weeks. So this was a solid whole body program. Let's look at the results. For muscle size, growth was pretty much equal across the board. In the quads, the low load group went from 54.6 millimeters to 59.8 millimeters, a 9.5% increase. The high load group went from 57.1 millimeters to 62.3 millimeters, a 9.3% increase. Basically identical. Same story with the triceps. The low load group went from 57 millimeters to 59.9 millimeters, a 5.2% increase. And the high load group went from 59 millimeters to 62.6 millimeters, a 6% increase. Technically on top, but minimally. The only small difference was in the biceps. The low load group went from 33.6 millimeters to 36.5 millimeters, an 8.6% increase, while the high load group went from 35.3 millimeters to 37.2 millimeters, just a 5.3% increase. But overall, hypertrophy was essentially the same. Where things split apart, once again, was strength. On the bench press, the low load group went from 101 kilograms to 103 kilograms, a 2% increase. The high load group jumped from 101 kilograms to 108 kilograms, a 6.5% increase. Even more dramatic was the squat. The low load group went from 122 kilograms to 133 kilograms, an 8.8% bump. The high load group shot from 121 kilograms to 145 kilograms, a 19.6% increase, more than double the strength gains in yet another study. Now, here's the interesting wrinkle. When they tested muscular endurance, so bench press at 50% of max to failure, the low load group improved by 16.5%, while the high load group actually went down slightly by about 1%. So yes, the light weights boosted endurance. But here's the catch. Weight training really shouldn't be your go-to for endurance. Sure, it builds some muscular stamina, but you pay for it with a lot more muscle damage and recovery cost, as I mentioned at the beginning of this whole thing. If your goal is endurance, you're better off using dedicated conditioning work, running, cycling, rowing, things like that. Resistance training should be used to build muscle and strength, not to chase endurance adaptations that you could get more efficiently elsewhere. Not to mention, the endurance adaptations acquired here are specific to lifting. Improving muscular endurance in a squat does not necessarily translate to running. I'm talking about said principle here. Specific adaptations to impose demands. This is another principle I've spoken about in many other videos. So the big question here after all this is, how do we structure lifting alongside running in a practical manner? Well, I'm going to give you a 3-part program for free in the description of this video. I just need your email address. I'll have a hybrid style program that's very similar to what I actually follow. It will have a cardio only program. It will also have a race centric upper body, lower body program where lifting volume cuts back to allow for more rest and running should you choose to prep for a race. It also includes a calculator from Luke Humphrey that you can use to find your running paces if you're shooting in the dark here. My goal with this document is to provide you basically all the materials you need to start lifting while you're running and to even improve your running. But I think the big takeaway here is to structure your rep schemes from 5 to 12 reps. Don't be afraid of the heavier lifts. And if you're a beginner, stick to 8 to 12 until you build some confidence at the heavier loads. In my opinion, and based on the data that I've provided you today, heavyweight, low rep lifting is the smarter complement to running, if even just from an injury prevention standpoint, which of course should be at the top of everyone's list. Also, clearly from this data, all 3 studies showed that while hypertrophy outcomes were similar between protocols, strength outcomes dramatically favored the lower rep, higher weight protocols. So when you're trying to decide how to plan out your program, try to be specific with every single aspect of it. What is the running actually for? What is the lifting actually for? Are they the best tools for the goal that I want? And most importantly, am I going to remain injury-free doing what I'm doing? But that's it for me. Once again, my name is Randall James, and this is Always Adaptive, a business born from the idea that you are always adapting, literally right this moment. Whether you are sitting or you're standing, I'm standing, that is an input. My body is adapting to this right now. So control your inputs and you can control your life. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next one. Stay adaptive.